One of the individuals that was one of my partners in organized crime, and he was a made guy in the family, Ruggiero. I mean, he was what I call a 24-hour-a-day wise guy. I mean, that's all he knew. He grew up being a thief and evolved into becoming a made guy. I mean, he ate and slept being a gangster. Most of the guys, that's what's in their mind. You know, their mindset is crime, how to make money, and they'll make money anyway. I know wise guys. I'm Joseph D. Pistone, aka Donnie Brasco, the FBI agent who spent 6 years undercover in the Bonanno crime family, living, sleeping, eating, and socializing with these wise guys.
This is Dan Verton reporting. To those who know him, he is a pioneering legend of law enforcement. But in 1976, FBI Special Agent Joseph D. Pistone went undercover as jewel thief Donnie Brasco. For 6 years, he cultivated relationships and collected evidence against the New York-based Italian mafia, the La Cosa Nostra. When he emerged, just months before becoming a made man and an official member of the Bonanno crime family, Pistone had dealt a devastating blow to organized crime in America, sending more than 100 stone-cold killers to prison and lifting the veil of invincibility that had surrounded the mob for decades. Now, for the first time, Homeland Security Television brings you this legend of law enforcement and his insights into the evolution of organized crime around the world, particularly its shift to white-collar and electronic crimes targeting corporate America. This is Donnie Brasco 2.0, the way of the white-collar wise guy.
Basically, today we're talking the American Mafia and the Russian Mafia. Of course, most of my work is against the American Mafia, the LCN in the United States. The activities that they're involved in, they're still involved in, of course, gambling, loan sharking, the construction industry, some low-level street crimes. But what they've, and I saw it during my undercover years, they started involved in more white-collar crime, basically stocks and bonds and computer crimes. The crimes are through the use of computers, stock frauds, pump and dump. They pump up a stock, a penny stock, and then when it gets to a certain price, they get out from under it, they dump it, and it's less risk because they're not really up front, face to face with whoever they're defrauding. I mean, it's all about money. That's what it's about. Some instances taking over a small company, but mostly with major corporations is basically extortion by either selling their secrets to a competitor, or using the secrets as far as moving money out of their banks, out of the corporation bank account into a bank account, offshore bank account that they set up.
Former FBI Special Agent Dave Drab spent a career investigating the mob in Cleveland and was involved in one of the first cases to be prosecuted under the Economic Espionage Act. According to Drab, the mob's organizational structure remains unchanged, but its tactics and targets have shifted dramatically toward the virtual.
The story that Donnie Brasco brings to our discussion is the reality of criminal greed and the tactics that are used in exploiting weaknesses, human weakness, identifying vulnerabilities, And that's something that doesn't change. The mafia was a personification of an individual. It's about a person. I'm a made guy. He's a friend of ours. He's one of us. He's with us. These are all talking about people who have identification and identity through this affiliation. Today's wise guys don't have that kind of affiliation. It's not personification as much as it is virtualization, where you have people who are somewhat anonymous in their deeds, and they're out there carrying on crimes in the cyber world that that do not require the force of an organization, a physical force of individuals behind him.
The wise guys, a lot of them that I dealt with, they're street guys, and they rule by intimidation, and they rule by getting in your face and intimidating you, and that's one of the reasons why they recruit brokers or hackers to commit their white collar type crimes. Most of them don't have that kind of intelligence, to hack or to plan a scheme. They'll get the scheme in their head, but they don't have the wherewithal to carry it out as far as, how to hack into a company's secrets on the computer or how stocks and bonds really work.
Recently, a database system administrator was pleading guilty to having stolen 8.5 million customer records from a financial industry organization that was a subsidiary of Fidelity. And that is the guy the mob is going to look for. They're going to go after that person because of his capability, what he's gained access to. And they are going to take that to the Russian mob. They're going to take it wherever they need to take it in order to turn it into gold.
There's several ways that they do it, and a lot of it's intimidation. A lot of it is finding a weakness of somebody that they know is in a position to help them, and then exploiting that weakness. Might be a relative.
So the key is they have to get inside. And when you look at individuals who have access to resources, this is where the mob is migrating. They're moving in the direction of how do you get to these resources. And it's no different than it was years ago. Any individual who came in contact with a mafia member that somehow exposed the fact that they had access to something of value, the mob would exploit it. And they would find a way to work the guy to get them to do what they wanted them to do so they could get access to it. So individuals in organizations today who may not have the loyalties to their employer, or individuals who are maybe disgruntled with what is occurring in the corporate environment that they're in, they are prime targets for individuals like mafia types.
The organizations are the same. They haven't changed the organizational structure. I mean, all the money still rise up, and that's the one thing about the American mafia is that they're pretty structured. The Russian mafia there's a structure, but it's loose. It's a very loose structure. But that's what kept the American mafia going for so long, is that they had a structure within each family, and all the monies went up to the heads of the family.
You have a triangle. You have a boss at the top, you have a captain, an underboss, a consigliere, you have soldiers. That structure is very much intact when it's working correctly. The soldiers go out and earn money. They send that money upward to the boss. The boss in turn buys protection, oversees the affairs of the family, collaborates with other families, and negotiates and so forth.
What an investigator has to do is sit down and map out all the leads and see where each one came from and where each one is going and where it's going to lead you, and not disregard anything. Because I found in all the years, working under and knowing these guys, is that nothing is beyond their imagination. So you just have to be diligent, and you have to follow every lead and cover it, to its end, basically. And not to underestimate these guys, as far as what they're capable of doing. And like I said, a lot of these guys, may have an 8th grade, 9th grade education, but they have the wherewithal to go out and get somebody else to further whatever criminal activity they want to get into, especially the white-collar crimes.
Corporate investigators are very heavily assigned. Their responsibilities are enormous. The burden of implementing IT programs and technologies are very overwhelming. And I think that when an investigation begins, there's going to be a natural tendency to bundle it up, tie it up, and conclude it without really going extra steps to ensure that there is no conspiracy behind it that needs to be understood further. We see that all the time, or at least I saw that as an investigator of economic espionage in the FBI, where the tentacles of the activity are incompletely addressed. They're not fully addressed, and for that reason, it's very difficult to be able to make the connection to a foreign-sponsored espionage attack. That's one of the challenges that investigators around the world are facing, because laws in different countries and different jurisdictions make it very difficult to effectively investigate and identify the criminal elements that are actually behind many of these attacks. That's why it's critically important to maintain good logs of activities that occur within the enterprise environment, suspicious calls, suspicious activities that need to be evaluated by security professionals to ensure that there are all the avenues have been appropriately explored.
The Russians are very good at it, and that's the difference between the Russian organized crime and the American mafia, is that the Russians are a little more sophisticated, because a lot of the individuals involved in Russian organized crime were former KGB agents, former politicians, although a lot of them are just street thugs. But once Russia collapsed, a lot of these individuals that were out of jobs, so to speak, progressed or switched over to becoming involved with the organized crime figures.
Generally speaking, foreign-sponsored operations are nearly impossible to detect, and these are the kinds of things that any ordinary business person, corporate type, is no match for a trained intelligence officer. The fact that foreign governments will plant somebody within an organization as part of a long-term espionage collection operation are going to do that very effectively. But some foreign governments are very effective at going after individuals from their country and extorting them, or applying other intimidation to get them to do what they want them to do. And that's very, very common, especially if they have family in that country that may need medical care or some other kind of attention. The government will use that against them and force them to do what they're told to do. Very common practice.
The level of violence is different within the organizations. The American Mafia, their level of violence is concentrated at people that are either members of the organization or other crooks or thieves, for lack of better words, that are involved with them, but may have crossed them in some way. The American Mafia, as a rule, doesn't kill citizens. If they want to kill you, they're not going to go into a restaurant and take out everybody in a restaurant just to get at you. Where the Russian Mafia, the Colombians, the Triads, they'll take out anybody around you. They don't have any regard for who else gets killed besides the individual that they've targeted.
My experience was with Angelo Leonardo. I first met him in 1979. He was always a gentleman. He was well respected in his community. He lived in an affluent community. Conversely, the boss of the family at the time was very modest. He was very cold and distant. If an FBI agent would come in his sight, he'd spit at the agent. Angelo Leonardo, on the other hand, was a gentleman. Angelo was an individual that had basically been a crime wave for 50 years or better. And because he had never been effectively prosecuted and convicted, he was able to reach this golden age of a criminal career, 76 years old. But what we saw beneath this were individuals who were wannabes, individuals coming up out of the streets wanting to be wise guys. They didn't have the stature, the respect of the community that many of these older mob bosses earned over the years. Their community cared for them, and they cared for them, provided care back to them as well. And that's something that we didn't see at this generation. And then there were the cultural changes, the use toward drug use and dealing in drugs and some of these other areas that a lot of the old timers didn't buy into.
You know, Americans, we're short on patience. You know, it's like we go into a war, you know, if it's not over in 24 hours, what are you guys doing? And it's, you know, when you're trying to plant somebody or have somebody infiltrate a major organized crime syndicate, it takes a while. Another big problem is you always hear, you know, I mean, I'm involved in a lot of undercover operations, not as an operative, but in an advisory capacity, is that money. You can't be worried about money, you know, if you're trying to place somebody in a position where they can infiltrate an organization. If you're worrying about your budget, then you're going to cut short that operation. If it started now, I doubt if it would go 6 years. I think because the time that I started my operation, we hadn't had any real long-term operations, so they wanted to get into, you know, when I say long-term, you know, they wanted to get into a year type undercover operation at 6 months, a year. So that was one of the reasons. The other reason was that, you know, I was lucky that the bosses I had in New York City, you know, they were street guys. And I think that's another, and not to knock anybody, but I think that's another situation, is that you need good criminal guys to run undercover operations. Guys that have worked criminal cases and have a criminal, when I say a criminal mind, a criminal mind, how to investigate criminals. And too often our people that are investigating the terrorist activities don't have that criminal instinct
Unfortunately, there's only one Donnie Brasco, in my view. I think the time that he was in history was unique. It was the end of the Hoover era. It was a time when undercover operations were being developed. Joe Pistone was a pioneer. He was an architect. Much of what he did could not have happened under current kinds of controls and legal mechanisms that are in place.
I think the commitment starts with the organization, and what I mean by organization is whatever law enforcement organization or basically the war on terror, the government. And the problem with the U.S. is we want everything resolved now. We want everything resolved now, and I don't believe that the government has that commitment to set out a long-term investigation to attempt to infiltrate any of these terrorist groups and leave somebody there for years, without making arrests or without dissolving the organization. It's just a mindset of what's going on now as far as with law enforcement and the government. I mean, there's no law enforcement investigation that goes a couple years anymore.
We desperately need that kind of leadership, that kind of commitment, and we need to resource good people like the Donnie Brascos out there to get them in so that they can do what needs to be done.
So is it safe to say that we need a Donnie Brasco 2.0?
Perhaps a Donnie Brasco 2.0.
So Joe, the times have changed, the technology has changed, but what you're saying is organized crime gets it.
Yeah, they do.